Hello, my name is Sheila Wong, co-founder of the Asian Gold Ribbon campaign. I was born in Hong Kong and arrived in Canada at the age of 6. On our first day of school in Canada, we had to change our Chinese names to English names, so it made it easier for our teachers to call on us. We didn't speak any English, or at least not very much. My parents taught me how to speak a few phrases in English on the long airplane ride across the Pacific Ocean. On the first day of school, what do you think is the most important phrase for a child to learn to communicate with their teachers? May I use the washroom? However, my parents had learned British English at the time, and they taught us how to say, may I use the WC? There was not one teacher in Calgary who knew what a WC was. And I was getting upset. I was frantic because I really had to go. And I was afraid I was going to wet myself in front of the entire class. Now, my brother, Ken, is a year older than me, and he was held back a grade. He was supposed to go to grade 2, but without an ESL program, or English as a second language program, he was held back in grade 1. There was no kindergarten in the school I attended, so I was in grade 1 with him. And bless him, he went up to the teacher and he gestured to the teacher and said, "Wee." And it provided the teacher enough information to understand what I needed. And there was another first that week. My brother had to stay after school one day and couldn't walk with me. And I walked home alone. And at that time, it was very safe for children to walk home from school on their own. Besides, our home was only 2 blocks away. There were some older boys who were hanging out, and they were at the top of the hill where the school was situated. And I was walking along the sidewalk. And they started to roll down the hill as I walked past, calling me Chinky Chinky Chinaman. And as they did that, they knocked me over like a bowling pin. Of course, I went home crying, and my mom asked what happened, and I explained, and I said, I don't want to go back to school. She said, I'll tell you what, I'll meet you at the end of the block, and you come home from school. I'll be there to watch for you as you come home from school. The next time I walked past those boys, they did the same thing, called out Chinky Chinky Chinaman. And, I didn't know English enough to understand what that meant, but I understood the tone and I understood that it was mean, it was not nice, and I didn't want to be called Chinky Chinky Chinaman. As I walked past, they started to roll down the hill, and I had the courage to run out of the way and called out to them to tell them to stop it, because my mother taught me how to say that. My mother gave me courage that day because she stood at the end of the street watching me, and I knew I was going to be okay. In hindsight, I realized how wise she was in that action. She wasn't a helicopter mom. She wasn't going to hold my hand, and she wasn't going to face my persecutors directly. She made me do that. She made me stand up for myself. And in that, I developed the confidence to do that throughout life. Of course, the teasing and the bullying stopped soon after, because what fun is it when your victim is fighting back? Now, let me back up a little bit and tell you about our family story. Our family story about coming to North America started 3 generations before me. My great-grandfather worked as a laborer on the railroad in the United States around the late 1800s. When he finished working, he returned home to China and had a son, my father's father. This is where things are a little bit blurry in our family history, but as I understood it, it seems that my great-grandfather might have had enough paperwork that allowed his son to return to the United States in years later. My grandfather had 3 children. He moved to San Francisco and brought his eldest son with him, leaving behind his wife and the 2 younger sons. My father was the youngest of the 3 boys. He was an infant when his father left in around 1928-29. It appears that my grandfather was one of the privileged with proper papers to immigrate to the US. However, due to the Chinese Exclusion Act, he was unable to bring his wife and 2 younger sons to America. They were never reunited. In 1943, the Chinese Exclusion Act ended in the US, and in 1947 in Canada. My grandfather probably, looking back now, he probably thought he didn't have the opportunity to bring his family. So my grandfather, seeing it as fruitless, and he wanted to help people who were with him in the Chinese community who were facing deportation because they were illegal immigrants. What he did was very common in those days. He sold his 2 younger sons' birth papers to 2 men, and they are known as paper sons. And this happened a lot. Fast forward to years later when my father had his own family and we were born living in Hong Kong. He had the opportunity when immigration policies opened up for Canada to apply. And because of his technical skills, he was given enough points and qualified for immigration. That whole process happened very quickly. I think by the time he was accepted and was told that he was able to immigrate to Canada, he had 3 months to do so. And I remember even at that age, how exciting it was. It was a time of getting ready to move to a new country, what was in store for us. And there was obviously a lot of preparation my parents had to do. My mother had woolen coats with lining tailor-made for us because Canada was going to be cold. Of course, we arrived in Canada and those woolen coats were like having a windbreaker. And as the snow started and the inclement weather started, those woolen coats didn't last us very long. We actually had to go out and buy parkas because the Calgary winters were bleak. I asked my parents, why did we move to Canada? And why not the US? Because I remember in the early 70s, my father went down to Oakland in California to visit, to see what the situation was like. He was scouting it out. And we have relatives there. And he came back about 6 months later and he said to my mother, if you want us to return to Hong Kong and have that kind of life, then we will move to the US. And they decided at that point, we had a very good quality of life in Canada. It was a safe environment. It was generally accepting of immigrants. I didn't understand until years later, maybe even just 10, 15 years ago, when I asked my father what made him decide that the United States wasn't going to be safe for us. And he said in the early 70s, they had the race riots in Oakland. And the riots were similar to the student riots that we had just left in Hong Kong. And he said there was a lot of violence on the streets. There were curfews. He said it just wasn't the right environment for us. And life in Calgary was very calm and comfortable. I remember as children, we played on the streets with all the other children. And our father would whistle for us to come home for dinner. And it didn't matter that we were all on the streets in inner city Calgary playing. I realized that historical events really affected our family directly and the decisions that we had made. And today I am proud to call myself Canadian and equally as proud to call myself Asian.